The first ship lost in the Battle of the Atlantic wasn't a warship. It wasn't a convoy escort. It wasn't even carrying troops. It was a passenger liner. On the evening of September 3rd, 1939, just hours after Britain declared war on Germany, the SS Athenia was torpedoed in the North Atlantic. Nearly 1,400 civilians were aboard, families, tourists, refugees fleeing Europe, and crew members who had no idea the world had just changed. The sinking of Athenia marked the beginning of the longest and deadliest naval campaign of World War II. And yet, her story is often overshadowed by the massive battles that followed. Today, we're going back to the moment the war at sea truly began, and to the ship that became its first casualty. The SS Athenia was never meant for war. Launched in 1922 by the Donaldson Line of Glasgow, she was a modest, comfortable passenger liner designed for transatlantic service between the United Kingdom and Canada. At 526 feet long, she wasn't the largest ship on the ocean, but she was reliable, steady, and well-liked by travellers. Athenia carried 3 classes of passengers, offered spacious lounges, and had a reputation for smooth crossings. Her crew was trained for hospitality, not combat. By the late 1930s, she had become a familiar sight on the North Atlantic route, a ship built for families, emigrants, and tourists. But in the summer of 1939, the mood aboard her voyages began to shift. Europe was on edge. Hitler had invaded Czechoslovakia. Diplomats were warning of war. And thousands of people were trying to get out before the borders closed. When Athenia prepared to depart Liverpool on September 2nd, 1939, she carried 1,418 souls, including 315 Americans, hoping to escape the coming storm. They didn't know it yet, but they were sailing straight into history. Athenia left Liverpool under a cloud of uncertainty. Captain James Cook, a veteran mariner with decades of experience, knew war was likely. He ordered the ship to sail a more northerly route than usual, farther from the traditional shipping lanes, where German U-boats were expected to operate. He also ordered the ship to sail without lights at night, a precaution rarely taken on passenger liners. Passengers later recalled the eerie feeling of walking the decks in darkness, the ocean stretching out like a black void around them. Still, life aboard Athenia remained calm. Children played on deck, families gathered in the lounges, meals were served as usual, and many passengers believed the crisis would soon pass. But on the morning of September 3rd, everything changed. At 11:15 a.m., Britain officially declared war on Germany. Athenia was now sailing in a war zone. Unbeknownst to Athenia, a German submarine was already nearby. U-30, commanded by Oberleutnant Fritz Julius Lemp, had been patrolling the area since the war began. German U-boats had been ordered to avoid attacking passenger ships, a lesson learned from the Lusitania disaster in World War I. But Lemp believed he had spotted an armed merchant cruiser, a ship that could legally be attacked. Through his periscope, he saw a vessel zigzagging, a maneuver typical of warships. He made a fatal assumption. At 7:38 p.m., U-30 fired 2 torpedoes. One malfunctioned. The other struck Athenia on her port side just aft of the engine room. The explosion ripped through the ship. Lights flickered. Bulkheads buckled. Passengers were thrown from their chairs. The Battle of the Atlantic had begun. Captain Cook immediately realized the ship was mortally wounded. He ordered the crew to send distress signals and begin lowering the lifeboats. Athenia began listing to port, making the evacuation difficult. Despite the chaos, the crew performed heroically. Lifeboats were launched in heavy seas, passengers were guided to the decks, radio operators sent SOS messages until the power failed, and crew members returned again and again to rescue those trapped below. But the situation was dire. Some lifeboats capsized, others were damaged by the explosion. And as darkness fell, the Atlantic grew colder and rougher. Among the passengers were dozens of children. Many were separated from their families in the confusion. Survivors later described the haunting sound of the ship's engines winding down, the groaning of metal, and the cries of people struggling in the water. Athenia was dying, but help was on the way. The distress call was picked up by several ships, including the SS City of Flint, an American freighter, the Canute Nelson, a Norwegian vessel, the Southern Cross, a yacht converted for rescue operations, and the Royal Navy destroyers, HMS Electra and HMS Escort. City of Flint arrived first. Captain Joseph Gaynard, an American, maneuvered his freighter dangerously close to the lifeboats, risking collision in the darkness. His crew hauled survivors aboard using cargo nets, ropes, and sheer strength. Newt Nelson rescued hundreds more, though one of its lifeboats tragically capsized during the transfer. By dawn, the sea was littered with debris, overturned boats, and exhausted survivors. At 11 a.m. on September the 4th, after nearly 14 hours of agony, the SS Athenia finally slipped beneath the waves. She sank stern first, her bow rising briefly before disappearing into the Atlantic. The first civilian ship of World War II was gone. In total, 117 people died, including 28 Americans. The sinking of Athenia sent shockwaves around the world. Hitler was furious when he learned a passenger ship had been sunk on the first day of the war. He feared it would bring the United States into the conflict. The German Navy issued a statement denying any involvement. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels blamed the British, claiming they had sunk their own ship to frame Germany. It was a lie, but it would take years for the truth to emerge. Fritz Julius Lemp, the commander of U-30, realized almost immediately that he had made a terrible mistake. He reported the sinking to his superiors, but the German Navy covered it up. Lemp himself died in 1941 when his submarine, U-110, was captured and later sank. He never publicly admitted responsibility. Only after the war did German naval records confirm that U-30 had torpedoed Athenia. The sinking of SS Athenia was more than a tragedy. It was a warning. It showed that civilians would not be spared, that the Atlantic would become a battlefield, that U-boats would strike without warning, and that the war at sea would be long, brutal, and relentless. In the years that followed, thousands of ships would join Athenia on the ocean floor, including merchant freighters, tankers, troop transports, destroyers, corvettes, and hundreds of U-boats themselves. But Athenia was the first. Her sinking marked the opening shot of a 6-year struggle for control of the Atlantic, a struggle that would decide the fate of Britain, the outcome of the war, and the lives of millions. Today, the wreck of SS Athenia lies in deep water off the coast of Ireland, largely undisturbed. She is a war grave, the final resting place of the first victims of the Battle of the Atlantic. Her story reminds us that wars rarely begin with grand battles or famous victories. Sometimes they begin with a single torpedo, a single mistake, and a ship full of ordinary people caught in the crossfire of history. The Battle of the Atlantic would claim thousands of ships, but the first was Athenia, and the ocean has never forgotten her.